Welcome back. You're looking at the parts and pieces of another ground up SCX24 chassis build. And if you read the label, you guessed it. It's a 6x6 Vader chassis from Mofo RC. So you can see here, we are set up with tires, wheels, brass hubs. We've got plenty of shocks from Injora, telescoping. I've got some very light pressure springs. We've got a couple sets of links to make this work. Trans skid, transmission case. We've got brass aluminum knuckles. I've got two stock assemblies for axles. I've got another I need to build up. I've got some axles for that, some 30% overdrive. We've got FuryTech Lizard Pro. We've got a 7.4 BEC from Nsdrc, of course the V2 Nano Beast, and using the typical kind of center mount with the nylon transfer gear. I'm going to use a FlySky FSBS6 receiver, and then for the front and rear steering we've got Mofo's Servo Beast, and we've got this high voltage EcoPower. So those both can work at 7.4 volts. So we'll be able to pump those up, get some power. I've got a brass tray, an aluminum tray. I've got a nice aluminum servo horn here for the Servo Beast. And then of course, linkages here, aluminum and brass. So hopefully that is enough to get us going here. It should be anything that I somehow missed, I should have in my parts bin. But I've been super excited to do another 6x6, and I really like the Vader chassis that I built, so I figured this Vader 6x6 would be the logical choice for the next step. So stay tuned, we're going to jump into this. Alright, well I figure the first thing we had to do is take a look at what you get with this Vader chassis. So you can see I've got my original Vader that's built there. So this is the stretched version basically. So you get the two side rails, you get the roof piece. If this is anything like this one, you need to provide your own battery tray that rides right there. So I pulled one out of the parts bin. It comes with a little electronics / battery tray here, some aluminum posts, so some of that may be at your discretion. You get a hardware bag with the mounting pieces. You kind of get a hardware bag and some spacers, and it looks like some larger black screws here with the chassis. And then you've got some long hardware that came with your link riser / diff covers. So this is your center or second axle with the pass-through, so it has the hole in it. And then this is a link riser diff cover for the rear. If you're doing two rear axles, I'm going to do rear steering, so this one we used, we're going to have a servo tray on there. And then this is a spare tire carrier that will mount somewhere on the back side here. And then these are your link mounts that capture the links for that third axle. So that's kind of the basis of the kit. And I know he recommends, I believe, deadbolt for the front, and then I want to say it's maybe Jeep rear, and then deadbolt front again for the rear. So the way I'm going to set this up is similar to this one. So I'm going to stretch it a little more, and you can see how far the servo is. So this has Jeep front and deadbolt rear on it. So I'm going to do Jeep front, deadbolt rear, and then deadbolt front for that last little axle. So that ought to give me a nice long 6x6. So we're going to jump right into it. While I've got this out, I figured it'd be a good time to kind of mock this up next to it and give you an idea of how this is going to work. So it's exactly the same profile, you know, up until the back of the roof, where this one drops, and it drops right here and kind of cuts off. This one obviously keeps going, and the reason I wanted to mock this up is just, of course I've already done this, but I want to double check. The deadbolt rear would clear this assembly for the links, and it will. The axle can get up in front of it. Of course right now the shock is hitting it, but when the shock is actually mounted to this, it will all be pushed inward, so none of that will hit. So it looks like this same setup is going to work just fine with the 6x6. So that's going to be pretty long right there. So anyways, I think we're going to get into assembling these three axles first. Alright, first things first, axles. So we've got my front axle assembly here that's going to be the heavy. So all brass, steering, servo tray, and then diff cover. And then these Racing axle shafts come highly recommended. Never use those. I've got an empty stock plastic housing. Got some bearings there that hopefully will be enough. Mofo's 30%. That big servo beast, and then some brass knuckles from NHX. So that's the front. And then we go to the mid axle, we get to use the diff cover from the kit that has the hole in the back, and then the transfer worm gear for the second rear axle. And then this one is for the rear axle, but since we're doing four-wheel steer, we're not going to use that. We're going to have a servo tray on it instead. So we've got the other servo, and then I've got aluminum to keep this one quite a bit lighter, and this tray is aluminum as well. So that's the overview of the axles. So I'm going to get these guys assembled, and then we'll move forward. Alright, we got a little progress, got all the axles assembled. They're all free spinning nicely, greased up with some marine grease. So we're ready to move on. You can see I've got my stock drive shafts out here. So I've got deadbolt front and rear, and the Jeep front and rear females. What I'm lacking is a lot of the male and the U-joint pieces. So I've got two front males, U-joints, and then I've got a front Jeep female and a U-joint, and then a rear deadbolt female with a U-joint. So we're probably going to need deadbolt fronts for that third segment there, at least to start with. They may be unique with this kit, so we may do a little trimming or mixing and matching. So I've got some extra kits here. The short medium is the traditional one they've always had. So that short medium refers to the male shaft, so that's always the rear, that's always the front, and then you've got a deadbolt front, a Jeep rear, and a deadbolt rear female. So you never got that Jeep female front. So this axial one for the Gladiator, this new one, comes with a Jeep front and a deadbolt rear female, and then it has this new extra long male for this deadbolt rear, and then it's got the same short male front. It also comes with pins and hexes now, which is nice. So between those two, we ought to be able to make this work. So with that is going to be the transmission and motor assembly. So I've got the case, the skid, and Mofo's center mount motor mount for this Nano Beast V2, and it's got the nylon transfer pinion versus the brass. So I'm going to use that, and then I've got stock gears and bearings for the transmission that will pop in here. And then once we get that together, we'll hook it up to the Lizard Pro and test it off the truck, make sure we're good to go, and then we're jumping into chassis and we'll bust into these links and kind of see if we can get something looking like a vehicle. Well, I spoke too soon. I said there was no binding, and I guess there wasn't when I just had one axle on this mid-axle connected. but when actually screwing both of them on, I don't know if it's just because of the thickness of this case, but it basically pulled these two tight when they were through the peg hole with the screw. So it was spinning, but it was tight. So what I did was took out an O-ring on one side, and then on both of these drive shaft pieces, I just took the Dremel sanding wheel kind of across this face and just took off, you know, maybe a 1/2 millimeter, so I'm down right kind of to the edge. And doing that on both sides, and then screwing these on, was able to give me that clearance. I'm gonna get this guy pegged on here. Screw this one on and see if we get a nice free spin. It worked one-sided, but once you had them both on there. So now you can see there's a little gap. Now this one, maybe you can't see it. This one's fairly close there, you can see the gap. But much better than it was. Yeah, oh yeah, that's free spinning now. So I think I'll button it back up, tighten this diff cover down, and we'll be done with that mid axle. But something to know, because this is a plastic kind of diff cover that holds that bearing, it's, you know, it's not all perfect, it's 3D printed, so you may run into some inconsistencies and fitment issues like that. But just, you know, make sure, test it, make sure it's all smooth. You can always pull out 1 or 2 of these O-rings to get a little more play in there if needed, but just something to know. A little progress here. Got the motor transmission assembly together. So I've got my rear steer axle plugged into channel 3, my front axle into 1, and my ESC into channel 2. So I've got a 3S battery here to test it. And I've already connected to the Fury Tech app and adjusted my throttle and calibrated that for the motor, set the voltage cutoff. I haven't done any trim setup for these yet. This is just a test to make sure everything's working. So let me get this on. And I left the Lizard Pro at the 1.7 firmware that it shipped with, because that's what I've used successfully in the past. I think they're up to 2.3 now, but I may or may not update that firmware. We'll see how this performs. So super slow. Super smooth, like no vibration. That assembly feels really, really nice, really smooth, better than most stock assemblies. So I think that's a check for the motor and transmission. So it looks like our steering is working together. I'm not going to steer too hard until I get these endpoints and the dual rates set. I don't want to break anything. And we're going to add that 7.4 BEC to this arrangement, so we'll do that eventually. So I think now we're going to move to the chassis and take a look at assembling that, getting the links on, and hanging everything, and moving towards, I guess, wheels and tires. All right, making some progress on this chassis, and I've run into my first little snag, little fitment issue, and it's these cables coming up, and you can see they're kind of tie wrapped, so they're fairly stiff up to a point. You don't want to fold them back. You don't want them to contact the spinning can, so they're fine right now coming forward. But the problem is the battery tray being able to slide in and down. You can see it mounts in that hole and that hole. right there, so it needs to basically drop down right here. And so it's about halfway into that shrink wrapped part of the cables. So I may have to clearance, cut out some of this. I'm just going to have to think on that. I've got a couple of ideas, but I kind of stopped here. I got the electronics tray in and the link hangers, but I decided to go ahead and jump on to the links and shocks, get those built up so we can start getting in kind of the axles and everything, and then I'll come back to kind of the upper electronics and battery tray fitment. But something kind of odd, you can see I've got the shocks. I ordered 4 and then 2. They packaged them all together as 6, which was strange. And then these were in there, which I've never seen with these Injora telescoping shocks. So looks like they're brass sleeves versus the black ones that always come on there. So these do have the black ones installed. So I don't know, I may build up 1 or 2 and see if there's a difference. I'd love to hear if anybody knows what the deal is with these included sleeves. But other than that, I've got my kinetic very light pressure springs that I may swap in for those black soft ones that they come with. On the left here I've got Jeep high clearance 3-link front, and then I've got Deadbolt high clearance 4-link. So this is what we'll be pulling from. So I'm going to get these all assembled, get the balls and O-rings in there, and we'll come back to the axles and see if we can't get this kind of hung in, make sure the suspension is working, articulating, and then we'll see where we go from there. Little update here on the links, and seems like it's always something strange using Injora parts. And I kind of already knew this, and it's not a big deal, but the high clearance links are printed on the same side instead of opposite sides. So that's a kind of stupid little mistake there. But the real issue here was a tolerance fitment issue. So these front lower JLU links, the ball sockets, the holes, I guess, were machined too small. So out of this pile of ball joints and all of these that are installed, only 4 fit. So none of those fit in these at all. So obviously there's a tolerance issue with the little ball joints too, because in theory none of them should have fit if these were machined too small. I had 5 left over I didn't get to test because I found these 4 that fit, but just, it's always a little surprise with Injora. So I've already sworn off anything from Injora with bearings. So now I may have to start swearing off anything with ball sockets from Injora. All right, first little clearance issue. You can see here I've got nicely swinging links except for one. And I thought it was that, one of the problematic ball sockets, but after looking at it, it's contact. You can see a little silver there on the edge that's scraped off. So you can see that screw head back there. So I think I'm just going to have to pull that. Luckily it's just a motor mount to the transmission case. And I think I can pull this link out and just pull that right out and swap it for like a little button head that'll have more clearance. So that should alleviate it. If not, I can Dremel that down a little to make it work. Well, swapping out that piece of hardware was the key. So that little screw head bit of difference was all it needed. So it's not contacting any longer. Didn't have to Dremel anything. So exactly what I want. So we're going to move on to another set. Back with a little update. You can see I've got it kind of mocked up here. I've got the links in and the shocks on. And you can see I've got my C10 here for comparison. So originally I said, I'm going to set this up similar to this guy with the, I guess this is Jeep front and deadbolt rear. Yeah. So that's what this has right now. It's got Jeep front, deadbolt rear, so that pushes this axle back. But we did not move this static point. So now these are too close together. So basically you can see that where the axles hit on the C10. So I'd either have to put Jeep fronts here to kick this back further or go back to C10 rears to pull this up. The second little issue is this second axle. So the webbing on each side of the diff hits both of those link mounts. And then when I twist on compression, I start to scrape them. Right up the middle, it's clear, minus those webbings being kind of the stop. It couldn't really get up much further without hitting the frame, but there's a little clearance issue there that I could maybe solve by trimming if I want to leave this axle in that position. And then the last little bit is the front end. So we've got Jeep front end, but this servo beast is super deep. So it's actually going to be hitting the battery tray. It won't even be able to sit on this bar, get that low. So it's going to hit somewhere in here. So if you look at this one, it doesn't have as deep of a servo, so it actually misses the battery tray and can get down further. So that's what I would like to be able to do on this one. So that may involve a stretch to the front, but I'm already getting down pretty deep here. You can see the link is already angled upward. So I think what I really need to do is get some wheels and tires mounted up and assembled, get those on here, and then I can start arranging the links. I've got 2 more sets of C10 Jeep rears, a black and a red. So those are options. I could even take this deadbolt rear, put it on the front for a super stretch, and then take the C10 rear and replace it here just to move this forward, kick that out. I could always do C10, C10, that would kick this out a little bit and have equidistance links. So there's some options there. It's just something that I'm gonna have to play with. So let's take a look at these wheels and tires, get those together, and then we'll move forward. Wheels and tires, it's my favorite part right here. So I'll take you through what I've got here. I picked up some black UPWs, some ultra premium wheels from MofoRC. And these you can select the style of ring you would like. So I went silver ring on the black since last time I did a silver wheel with a black ring. And then I'm trying his new brass hubs. These are +6 hubs for a little weight. And then I've got an aluminum 0 offset hub for my spare. And then as you can see, I've got 7 meaty tires right here. So these are the pretty spanking new Baja Pro X from RC 4-wheel drive. These are very, very mean looking, very aggressive, very soft. I cannot wait to run these. Picked up several sets of these to try, and I'm glad I did because I've got plenty to use on this bad boy. So I'm gonna get these guys mounted up and see what they look like assembled. 1 wheel and tire to go. But before I finish up, I wanted to touch on something. So you can see here with this style ring, I went ahead and was able to attach it to this half of the rim off of the tire wheel assembly without the hub. And that is due to the fact that you can access all the hub screws with the ring on. So you can see there, you can get to them all easily inside that wheel. Versus this original set I bought, the ring style, I think this is the Super Duty reversible, but it's got a very wide ring, and you can see that it covers the hub screws. So on this style, you've got to put both halves of the wheel in there and actually mount that ring over the tire. And so if you want to remove the tire, you've got to take off all the beadlock ring screws to demount. So something to know, if you're going to be flip-flopping tires a lot, you may want to choose a ring style like this that allows that access to easily remove the outer half of the wheel. But just a little tidbit there. But let me finish this up and we'll move forward. All right, so you can clearly see the issue here. That's not going to work. You definitely can't steer can't flex, they're touching. So gonna have to adjust that. And I don't think I mentioned this. I did mention the brass sleeve. The only difference I could feel assembling that versus the black sleeve is just weight of the brass. They both felt just as smooth. So I just put the brass up front and ended up with the 4 very light pressure springs on the front 4. And then I just left their light pressure spring on the back, which honestly, these Injora soft springs are really close to these. I mean, these were a big improvement back in the day over some of the options on springs, but these are really pretty soft already. So just something to know. They may not really be doing much more than these. So I think now I'm gonna pull the wheels off and start rearranging some links, and we'll come back and see if I have gotten anywhere on this guy. Okay, got the links. The first adjustment done, I guess. So you can see the wheelbase is matched up to the C10. So I've got the Jeep C10 rear link swapped in there to that second axle instead of the deadbolt rear. So that gives me a little more space between those 2 axles, the same as this, but you can see due to the track width increase with those +6 hubs and the tire size, that's going to cause me some problems. So because of that +6, here's my radius point. So I'm turning my hinge point, so I'm turning, and because of the tire size and the increased suspension travel, they get into each other. Here we got smaller tires, we've got shorter shocks, less overall travel. So here there's no issue with that, but it's not a shocker. That's something that I think Mofo lists on his description of these, that if you do 4-wheel steer and larger tires, you know, you may have to work out your rear axle and rear links. So no big deal. This whole thing is kind of a Frankenstein experiment of what we can do here. So I think I'm gonna pull the JLU fronts to this 3rd axle, take those deadbolt fronts off, and then we'll have to figure out a new link setup for the front end. So more to come. Here we are, fully reworked, and it is looking good. I'm very happy. It's moving freely. So I went deadbolt rears at the front, C10 rears in the middle, and JLU fronts at the rear. So now I've got full articulation, full clearance, tons of twist. So I think this is going to be just fine. On the front, I had a little bind until I added my spacer in here. And of course, as always on these telescoping, I don't have the outer O-ring on with the wide flange. I only have the inner O-ring. And then I ended up removing the inner O-rings on those lowers to let those scoot inward. And then I spaced the screw outward, you can see, with a spacer, so it didn't protrude past the mount point. It didn't screw through there. Now it's just flush, because that was becoming a bind point in extreme compression potentially. But now everything is good. Not that I'll even be able to get that low once I get the battery tray in there. We'll see. But just wanted to make sure everything is free and clear and there's no bind anywhere. Everything can flex and twist. So I think I'm happy with that. So now I think the challenge is going to be getting this guy running. You can see we're pretty vacant inside, so got a little work to do with the electronics. So I'm going to grab that, the battery tray, see about figuring out how to route that motor wire, and maybe we can get this guy rolling. One quick thing I forgot to mention was this rear drive shaft. Of course, I replaced it from this one that I had in there, since this is now Jeep front in the rear. But it ended up being a deadbolt female drive shaft, and then I had to break open another set of drive shafts to get the medium out of there. The short, you can see there's a short in here. It's just too small, it was slipping out. So with this arrangement, it's pretty good. I did trim off the deadbolt female just a bit, and I think I'm going to have to trim it a little more because it can actually catch and hold just barely. Like if I flex this up, if I do it one-handed, if I flex this up with it drooped, you can see it holds it. So it's got just a little, it just needs maybe a millimeter more. So if I put a little pressure on the back, it drops immediately. So I think I'm going to shave off just a little bit more off of that female deadbolt, and that will be fully moving and the inner won't be dropping out as well. So you may need 2 packs of these short mediums. I didn't even get into the Gladiator, the short extra long. So I mean, that I could have, if I needed. If I didn't have this, I would have used that and just cut one down. But everything's good. Here we are with a little third drive shaft progress. So initially, I thought I was just going to have to trim this female deadbolt rear a few more millimeters, and I have. But you can see I'm still hanging up. I'm locking up here, kind of creating a pivot. And you can also see I'm not able to fully engage this male, this typical male rear. So the challenge with this drive shaft is it needs a pretty wide range of motion. It needs to be able to come fairly close and then fairly far apart. And so the way it's trimmed now and the length of this male, it's falling out. But even if this male was longer, you can see it's hitting that stop, so it's causing that bind. So that led me to pull out the Gladiator drive shaft set. So I'm glad I did get that. So I've got this extra long inner, which I thought was the only difference. And it looks like the 2 female drive shafts are both deadbolt length. So I thought there was no difference, but here's the difference. So that's the Gladiator drive shaft. You get full engagement. There's no stop in there. This is the deadbolt. So you see that I'm hitting a stop. So I can't get that last little bit in there. So that's the same thing that's happening on the trimmed down version. No different. So I may have to use this longer inner with a trimmed up Gladiator to make this guy work. And hopefully that'll give me the full range of motion. So you may need this. This may come in handy. So that's cool to know that that's truly different. You do get longer range of motion and engagement on that Gladiator rear drive shaft. So cool. Well, that Gladiator rear axle trimmed up seemed to do the job. So I can get all the way up and it drops. So that's my worst case extension right there. You can see this is fully dropped, that's fully up. So before I was locking up right there. So now I've got my twist. The only thing I don't like is this, it may be because of trimming the inner and the outer, there's a little stiffness just in the engagement. I wish it was looser. Maybe it'll loosen up over time. But it seems to be working just fine. I mean, it doesn't seem to be catching or anything. Boom. So you can see I got the battery tray in there, at least for now. It may come back out for more wiring. But you can see I clearanced out that little cross brace on this side so those wires can come up. And if they get pushed down, they'll get pushed down away from the motor can. So then they kind of loop around. I'm bringing them up here. I may try to get them, I don't know, that's above the motor can. I want to keep them away from the spinning motor, but it'd be nice to bring them up over here and come right in. I think I'm going to run the Lizard right here. And the receiver, similar to what I did on my other build. So it'll sit somewhere in here. So if this motor could plug right in there, that'd be about perfect. and then I think I can snake the servo up here. We'll figure out routing for this guy, and then I've got to figure out that BEC. So there's still a little work to be done here, so maybe pulling a little bit of this apart to snake things in, we'll see, but that's where she sits now. Well, as you can see, I've torn it apart again. I just wasn't happy with this drive shaft sticking. You can see there, this is that gladiator that's trimmed down, and it's got some bind in there. So you can see I've got some more options here. And what is very odd is I opened up my other set of gladiator drive shafts, and lo and behold, it's like that deadbolt one. It won't fully engage. So I don't know what the deal is with that one that I have that I showed a minute ago that I got out of the gladiator set that does give full engagement. So this is acting just like a deadbolt female rear. So that's odd. But what I did do is pull out a JLU front, and so I may use that. So here I believe is a deadbolt. No, that's the JLU front, so that's giving me full engagement, and it's very smooth. There's no stop. Versus the cut deadbolt, which is still smooth, but it's got the stop in there. And then there's of course, the cut gladiator that has no stop, but it's tough. It's just a lot of binding. So that's the deadbolt. Let me find the right one. So this is what's going to go on there, and this should do it, because this Jeep front basically ends up being about what I trimmed the gladiator rear down to. It's a little longer, but I could always take a little off of that. But the main thing is I want this movement to be free, and it wasn't. So swapping this in, so a little more troubleshooting to get everything free moving, but I think in the end it's going to be worth it to have all this fully articulating and moving freely. I think we have achieved free moving drive shaft. Nothing hanging up. Looks like we've got that full range, no binding. I'm very happy with that. So you're doing something good when you can get this kind of flex that close together. So that looks like that is going to be awesome. So now let's try to move forward to electronics. Look at that, little progress update. That's looking like something. So I wanted to kind of update you here before I got all this installed. So you can see I trimmed up a little more of that battery tray leg, and that was to fit around screw head on this motor mount. This top one right here, it's got pretty large screws protruding, so it attaches right down here, so I had to just trim it off to be able to fit and come up flush against this mount. But that's all it took, was just a little bit of trimming. And then you can see I've taken off these two little pieces here, and that's just to flush out that edge, because that's going to butt up against the ESC tray. And you can see here on these new ESC trays, there's now like a little half circle cut out on the front and back, so these can be put in either direction. So that'll be nice to be able to snake wires up in that little cavity. So I wanted as much room there, so that's why I cut those off. If you look at this original one, it's ESC tray. You can see on the back here, it does not have those cutouts. It's the V1, so that should be a little nicer. And it looks like this BEC, the only place I'm gonna be able to mount it is underneath that ESC tray, probably double-sided, just right in here. And then the rest of the arrangement is gonna be just like this, I believe. That all fits pretty well. And then you can see I've got my servo slack in the rear kind of taken up, at least started. So I think I've got enough to get up here to the receiver. And you can see I got my spare mounted up here. I figured out what these large screws were for. They're to mount the spare tire. And I also discovered you're a little more limited on where you can put that spare tire mount. I wanted to put it right behind where it is. I wanted to put it here, but these two holes you can see are too wide. So you can mount it in this spot, or you can mount it where I've got it, or you can mount it here. So for some reason these are spaced further apart. I guess they're just on these braces. But I wanted to put it here, a little more central, but anyways, that's where it's gonna ride, I think, for now. But the other little point on the BEC, you can see here I've got my positive wire pulled out. I just got an X-Acto, lifted up the tabs and took that wire out. And that's because you're going to plug your battery in to your ESC as typical, but then you plug your battery balance port into the BEC. So you'll have both plugs of your battery plugged in. So then this BEC is actually going to power your receiver. So you do not want your ESC sending power, because it's plugged into the battery as well, to your receiver. So your receiver will just get power here, and it's going to get signal from your ESC for the motor and everything else. So just a little trick to know, it's not as plug and play as the Fury Tech. That one's in line with your battery plug, but super easy. But like I say, I'm just going to stick with 2S for now, because I would have to switch this out to a 3S balance lead if I were to try to do 3S. But I did hook it up and tested it, and wow, it's fast. Those servos are fast with that 7.4 on there. So I think I'm going to move forward and try to start buttoning this up and getting it going. Well, look at this. Looks like everything is buttoned up nicely. You can barely see any electronics there. Sitting nice and low. So I added a limiter strap, rubber band here. And the easy way to do that when you 4-link is you can just take out one of these screws, put in a longer one, and just run them basically head to head. I think I added a spacer here to back this one out a little so they didn't bind up. So they're in there tight and they just butt, so they basically make a rod. And then you've got this rod, of course. So that should keep the nose down. And then you can see there's a piece I totally forgot came with the kit, the Servo light bracket. So I've got the 2 spots for lights up front. Went ahead and threw that on there, and went ahead and got the tire carrier on and all my slack taken up around one of these aluminum bars in the back, which is nice and pretty well hidden by the tire. And then these did not come with the kit, these plastic black braces. These are some that I had gotten. I had ordered some extra aluminum crossbars and had Mofo RC throw in some black plastic ones. I used those black ones on this build. So I wanted to just do it similar and have the silver aluminum bar kind of at the nose, just like this one. So I think that looks pretty good. And then the electronics basically ended up really similar to the first Vader. So you can see the receiver there. And then I've got, actually my double side is under my servo plug to keep this receiver flush. And then the Lizard Pro is just wedged in there. So it's not double-sided, it's just wedged in. This rear servo plug snakes right under the Lizard Pro. And then the front one just goes, once pinched between each battery mount, down, and then it comes back up the center of this tray. And that little cutout of the ESC tray, as well as this red and black cable, that is the power to the receiver from the BEC below. And then this is the 3S, or the 2S, excuse me, balance plug from that BEC. So that's double-sided here. Everything is out of the way of the motor can. You can see just a little slack of that servo wire right there. And then the Bluetooth is double-sided down in between. And then there's a little bit of the front servo slack taken up there. but that tucks in all pretty nice. You see right, beyond the battery tray edge. So you basically get this whole battery tray, although the 3S, of course, even that one that's the stock size is too thick for this lid to close. So turns out I would have had to run 2S on this anyways. So that's how she sits right now. Foams in the back, no foams in the front. I did play with the settings on Fury Tech and trying to get the Nano Beast to not cog. I was getting a little cog between slow and faster transition, so I played with that a little bit, and I did upgrade the firmware to current. So it's a lot better. So let me put a battery in there and we'll test it out here. All right, battery's in. I'll tell you what, when I was testing this, just about every screw fell out of my steering arms and servo trays, so I went back and had to Loctite those promptly. But these guys are, look at that rear one, that Eco Power is super fast, a little bit quicker. So because of this 30% overdrive, there is a little bit of bind. So let's take a look at that. All right, let's see this 30% in action. 1, 2, 3, 4. So 4 rotations and we're back to normal. So what that does, and it may be exacerbated with 2 axles in the rear. So you can see going forward, it pulls itself really low, right? Which is great. But it'll unwind and that bind on the way back. Which honestly, once I'm on, a surface that has some give, some dirt, some loose rock, that's not going to be an issue. It's really just on a hard surface where you're going to get that wind up bind. But 30% is a pretty good percentage. So you can see here I've got the, let's see how slow I can get this to crawl. So I've got a pretty good transition worked out, but I had to play with the settings quite a bit. But anyone familiar with Fury Tech knows you've got to put a little time in. Everything seems to be functioning, so I think it's pretty well primed for a test run at this point, minus maybe putting in some front lights. Finally got the lights in, and as much as I like the idea of the servo mounted lights, the reality of it I don't really like, because you've got one more kind of moving wire that you need to allow slack, and these LEDs are just a little more fragile. I've already had some issues with one of them kind of flickering on an install. I think it's slowly breaking the connection, just with all the articulation. So this one I did a little different. Instead of tucking it under the battery and down there with all the suspension, there wasn't really room in the kind of the side battery tray mounts where I've got the servo cord snaked. So I wanted to keep it kind of up out of the way, so I ran it kind of just down the side of the battery tray, under here. And then I ended up taking off most of the shrink tube. It just wasn't flexible enough. And you can see I didn't shrink this. I just basically have it kind of to bundle the wires and kind of cover that bulk of red. But I just left a little bit of slack, right here. So as it needs it, I just want to make sure. And then the battery will kind of just come in here and sit beside it. And then that just went into one of my extra ports. So that 6-channel is coming in handy on this one. So turns out I've got a larger battery that will fit in there, not a 3S, but a larger 2S. So I'm gonna pull out some batteries real quick and we'll get this thing powered on. Here are the 3 batteries. So this is the 3S I was gonna initially use, and it's the thickest and of course stock. And then this Helios is a 2S 600, and it is slightly, it's about double stock, and it's a little bit thinner than this 3S, so it works out to just be perfect. Now if I could only find a 3S in this size. So this one has a little different configuration due to the height, but it still works well. So you can basically just slide it in here, and it just sits next to the light cables, like I said, just tucks in there. And then this guy right there, so you can see I've just powered on the receiver because I plugged in this balance port to the BEC. So the ESC is not on yet. So let's see, black up. So in this configuration, I've got to tuck the battery cable to the side of the battery right here. Wait a minute, I was going to twist these to make this even cleaner. Take up a little slack, so yeah, let me do this. And then pull the balance back over here. So now we got both. So then this main battery plug really, it's a little too chunky to sit on top of the battery, but the balance, at least the back of the balance cable, can fit nicely there. So the balance plug would be too thick, but the cord portion, and then you can see there that the battery just connection tucks to the side of the battery, and then this is in there nice and tight. These are snugged up, and that can go back as far as you want it to kind of clean it up. So ultimately pretty clean right there. A little more weight up front with that bigger battery. This has a little juice in it. Let's get this on. What's different about these lights, I guess this is a different plastic he's printing these with now, so you get almost this translucent glow out of them versus this original style. When I turn these on, you know, they're thick, you know, solid black, so you don't see through them. So that's kind of neat. These look a lot cooler since they're glowing, but that's the big battery in there. We pull this one out and we'll toss in the stock battery and you can see the difference. Okay, so here's the stock configuration, stock battery in there. So you can see, since it's so much thinner, you've got a lot more space to get things tucked back, but all in all, you're gonna have the cords up front. I mean, basically a very similar setup. You get a little more weight with the larger battery, so I do like that. Man, I'm really liking this glow. That looks super good. So I think that may bring us to the end of this build. Sorry this was an extremely long one, but sometimes that's how they go. A few steps forward, a few steps back, some learning along the way. But anyways, I hope this helped you if you plan on doing one of these Vader 6x6s, or any 6x6, I guess. And if you plan on doing one of these Nsdrc BECs, maybe this helped as well. This was my first experience with one. It will not be my last. I'm very impressed with these, and this is only at 7.4 volts. So I've got an 8.4, I believe, for another servo. It's a little more powerful for an upcoming build, so I'm excited to use that. But as always, thanks for watching, and stay tuned for something new coming down the pipe. Thanks.